you very much for the invite and the opportunity to present here today. Just to reiterate, my background is on grain crops, and I've working with the dairy team here. There's some really exciting opportunities to translate some of the agronomy work that was presented before to understand better how that affects bottom lines of a whole range of different end users. Our focus through working with CQU is to look at beef cattle, but we're very interested in the dairy component as well. So the take-home message that I want to get out today is that sorghum is very well adapted. We have got an excellent breeding program that's been running in Australia for I think 60 years now. We're talking about grain sorghums here. They are very well adapted to a low rainfall environment, high temperatures, and low input systems, so lower nitrogen. However, the feedback from all end users, the chicken meat industry in particular, is that the quality of the grain fluctuates so much. And the example was 2017, 2018, when some of the feed rations performed nearly 20% lower than expected. And they were not able to understand why. That's part of the work we're doing with the focus on beef at the moment. One trait we're looking at is the waxy trait. The waxy trait is something that you can actually see it when you grab the grain, the hard grain, and squash it between your thumb. It creates a smear, not a crack. So it is a little change that you can see, and it has previously demonstrated massive increases in digestible energy as well as a reduction in methane production. It's not a new trait, it's been around for a long time, it's not widely accepted in the market, and we want to understand why. The drivers for the research that we're doing is Northern Australia, where at the moment high commodity prices, land prices, as well as some risks around the existing cattle market and biosecurity are really changing the way the risk-reward proposition for developing farmland in the north. Cotton is leading the way, but we need in that system a more sustainable rotation to protect the soils, and realising that cattle will always be the dominant system in the north. So how do those new crops fit into an existing system, cattle system? Waxy sorghum is a single gene mutation, so again, all it really changes is the amount of amylose in the starch, and that relationship between the proportion of amylose and the digestible energy is very strong. But I will argue we don't know why it is strong. There are two things that have been done that have very clearly shown a relationship, and it is that proportion of amylose to digestible energy, and also a type of protein that encapsulates every starch granule in the seed. Both those streams of research have demonstrated that they are the cause, or not the cause, but they are related to the digestible energy. Our research is trying to focus on unpacking that and understand how those two schools of thought can come together. Our hypothesis is that the proteins that encapsulate the starch granules, so we're now talking from the particle size that was previously talked about to the molecular level of the little grains of starch inside the seed, how that encapsulation affects the enzymes in the cattle stomach ability to digest that starch inside. And the difference with the less amylose means that they don't pack as tight. So that membrane is stretched, and perhaps the enzymes can access those granules inside the grain. That's also important, very similar to the previous presentation. As you process the grain, so if you cracked it, rolled it, steam flaked it, completely cooked it, we don't see a benefit of waxy versus non-waxy. It is like the silage, that partial cracking of the grain, that's where we have the biggest advantage. If both the grains, waxy and non-waxy, are partially cracked, waxy wins in digestible energy for cattle. The biggest problem, and I suspect part of why something that was discovered in the 1930s is not widely grown, is because there is a yield drag. These waxy sorghums, the Rex SS that are highlighted in the bottom of the box, were in all of our trials generally in the middle to lower yielding range. That's tonnes per hectare. Now, when we translate that from tonnes per hectare to the metabolizable energy per hectare, it switches right across. You're producing many more megajoules per hectare by growing the waxy type of sorghum. What we know though is that those original mutations that created the waxy sorghum, they came from a line that had low yield. And researchers in the US discovered that it was nothing to do with the waxy trait itself that was causing the yield penalty. It was the background that it was selected from. So there is a really strong probability that we will be able to breed high yielding waxy varieties that also produce much greater digestible energy. Where our research is at the moment, we're doing trials in Emerald and Gatton here, where we're looking at that, why is that relationship between the amount of amylose and the proteins around the starch granule, how reliable that is across different production environments. So we're doing silly trials, like we pull off all the leaves on the stem, so we have little tiny grains, and we also have plantings that are very, very late, so they have no heat at all during the grain filling. We have other trials where we're putting heaps of fertiliser, heaps of nitrogen to get really, really big fat grains. So we can start to tease apart this relationship between grain size and digestible energy for waxy versus non-waxy. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the work we're doing is very much at the agronomic phase. There is a lot of research being done in Warwick with the pre-breeding team that are looking at more detail into not just a waxy type, but also more digestible proteins, combinations of those waxy and digestible proteins, as well as grain size, which we've been discussing a lot in the earlier presentation, and it'd be very interesting to get your thoughts. But simply, as you get bigger grains, breaking that grain becomes easier and more accessible to the animal. We have a postdoc in Hermitage that is looking at that grain size component. There is a lot of interest from and diversity in germplasm, but there's not the market pull. Why would grain growers want to grow a more digestible sorghum? Will they get the money for it? Who will pay for it? So what we're working at the moment is we've gone to the agronomic phase with some germplasm that may not be as well adapted. We're testing it through cattle beasts to see, is that benefit stable across all production environments? Is it just a benefit in terms of live weight gain, or are we also seeing reductions in methane? And can we predict it? Can we say we predict it for a cattle beast, for chickens, for a silage. And that work's being led by Simon Quigley at CQU, looking at a supplement with a grain sorghum, knowing that the protein meals are becoming more expensive, unavailable, and supplies variable. The work that is going on has already looked at some feeds with some legume crops and is about to start with the waxy sorghum. So the take-home message is that sorghum is a very well adapted crop. It grows well in heat, it grows well with limited fertiliser and water. The grain quality is not just a little bit lower in some circumstances, but variable. And we're talking about grain. We haven't quite got to the stage where we're incorporating it into a silage, but I know some of the colleagues in this room have done that. Waxy sorghum has a theoretical basis for much higher end user qualities, whether they be for milk production or live weight gains or methane production. Ongoing research is exploring how stable this benefit is across environments. This, as I mentioned at the beginning, this research was funded for Northern Australia, and we're really looking at ways to explore different end users, like silage, to explore what the value proposition for a dairy farmer is and a grain grower for taking on not just waxy sorghum, but potentially a pipeline of improved quality attributes of sorghum, whether they be protein, waxy, grain size. And that's me. Thank you very much.